What if the widow wasn't just grieving? What if she was negotiating? What you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about loyalty, legacy, and what really happens when the face of a movement falls. For weeks, the world was told one story: Charlie Keaton, star of the Liberty Forward Network, gunned down in a tragic, senseless act of violence. A lone attacker, an open and shut case, a grieving widow, a shattered organization, case closed, right? Then Candace Ward stepped in on her podcast, on late-night streams, in leaked voice notes no one was supposed to hear. Candace began to hint at something darker: missing footage, conflicting timelines, a leadership team that seemed more interested in saving the brand than saving the truth. And at the very center of that storm, Erika Kirk, Charlie's widow, now the new chair and CEO of Liberty Forward Network. For nearly a month, Erika said almost nothing about the details of Charlie's death. No press conferences about evidence. No demands for full transparency. No calls for the organization to stand down until the facts were clear. But behind the scenes, Candace says she was gathering receipts, screenshots, emails, anonymous testimonies from inside the organization. And then, the message that changed everything: I can prove she's helping cover this up. Tonight, Erika finally breaks her silence. Candace drops what she claims is proof, and the world is forced to ask, is this grief or a cover-up? Stay with me, because once you see how deep this goes, you won't look at any movement the same way again. The night Charlie Keaton died, the air felt electric. It was one of those late summer evenings where the sky never quite goes fully dark. The stage lights cut through the twilight, and the crowd believes they're witnessing history. Stadium speakers shook with applause as Charlie finished his speech, a mix of war stories, culture war rants, and that signature smile that made millions feel like he was speaking just to them. Behind him, off to the side of the stage, stood his inner circle: staffers, security, a few carefully chosen guests. And somewhere in the VIP section, hands clasped together, eyes wet and shining, was his wife, Erika Kirk, elegant, composed, the woman the media loved to call the First Lady of Liberty. At 9:17 p.m., the crowd roared as Charlie lifted his hand in a final wave. At 9:18 p.m., the first shot rang out. Everything after that became a blur of chaos and contradiction. Some swore they heard 2 shots. Some swore they heard 3. The official report said 1. We've all seen the clips by now. Charlie collapsing, security moving in, the crowd splitting between panic and confusion. The video replayed on every network, every social feed, every commentary channel trying to own the narrative. But the public only saw the front, the stage, the fall. They didn't see what was happening behind him. According to the initial statements from Liberty Forward Network, the staff reacted heroically. They said Charlie's team went into immediate protective mode, that those closest to him tried to shield him, that everyone did everything they could. That's the story they pushed. But there was another story developing in private calls and encrypted chats. A story Candace Ward says was whispered to her by people who claimed to be inside the building that night. According to them, one man stood out, not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't do. Lucas McCoy, chief of staff to Charlie Keaton, the man Erika publicly called the backbone of the mission in a leaked clip, the one that first made its way to Candace's producer through an anonymous email. You can see Lucas just a few feet behind Charlie. The moment the shot hits, his body moves, but not the way you'd expect. He doesn't duck. He doesn't lunge forward. He doesn't even turn fully around. He simply lifts his phone to his ear and walks away. No checking on Charlie. No frantic scanning of the crowd. No visible panic. Just a calm, measured exit within 24 hours. Liberty Forward Network's official account shared a statement from Pastor Raymond McCoy, Lucas's father, a well-known spiritual advisor to the organization. In it, Pastor Raymond claimed his son had been drenched in blood and fighting to save Charlie while calling him in tears. Except in the leaked video, there's no blood, no visible contact, no desperate movements. Just that stroll. That discrepancy was the crack that invited questions. questions that Erin Cross did not seem eager to answer. For the first few days, the world gave her space. Commentators called for compassion. She just lost her husband. Let her grieve. Now is not the time for interrogations. But as the days turned into weeks, something felt off. Instead of demanding answers about bullet trajectories, autopsy findings, or the timeline of events, Erin appeared on a carefully curated handful of shows talking about something else. The future of Liberty Forward Network. She spoke about honoring Charlie's legacy, stepping into her new role, and being excited for what's next. She praised Lucas publicly. She called him remarkable under pressure. She reassured donors that the mission was alive and thriving, and people noticed. They noticed the lack of outrage. They noticed the lack of specific questions. They noticed the way she seemed more CEO than widow. In one particularly controversial interview, Erin looked straight into the camera and said, "There's nothing to hide. I've seen the case. It's solid. Let the world see the evil that took my husband from us." To her supporters, it sounded strong. A woman refusing to be broken. To her critics, it sounded rehearsed. A script written by PR, somewhere in a modest home studio, surrounded by stacks of printouts, screen recordings, and late-night coffee cups. Candace Ward hit pause on that interview. She watched Erin's face freeze in frame. "Nothing to hide," she repeated under her breath. Then, why does everything about this look hidden? By that point, Candace had already received dozens of messages. Staffers claiming they'd been told not to talk. Security contractors saying they'd been quietly dropped. Event volunteers who swore the timeline on the public release didn't match what they lived through. And then came the message, a former mid-level employee from Liberty Forward Network. Verified email. Old internal photos attached as proof. Subject line, "You need to know about Erin." What followed was a detailed account of late-night meetings, sealed documents, and whispered instructions to keep everything in-house, all allegedly coming from Erin herself. In the days after Charlie's death, the email ended with one chilling sentence: "She's not just grieving, she's managing this." Candace pushed back from her desk. For a moment, even she said nothing, because if that was true, then the question was no longer what happened to Charlie. It was who wanted the full truth buried. And why his widow might be helping them do it. As the lights of her studio camera blinked on and the red recording sign glowed, Candace knew exactly what her next episode would be. She would say Erin's name out loud on the record, and that's when everything began to spiral. The episode dropped on a Tuesday night. No teaser, no scheduled premiere, just a sudden explosive upload titled "The Questions Erin Cross Refuses to Answer," within hours. The video rocketed across the platform. That's how it always starts now, not with a quiet court filing or a calm press conference, but with a thumbnail, a title, and a wave of comments that feel more like a digital riot. Candace sat in her studio, eyes fixed on the real-time analytics. The numbers climbed. Tens of thousands of concurrent viewers, then hundreds of thousands. Chat messages flying up the side of the screen faster than anyone could read. "Erin is complicit. Expose Liberty Forward." Where is the autopsy report? Why no full footage release? In the video, Candace didn't outright accuse Erin of murder. That would have been too easy to dismiss, too easy to sue. Instead, she did something more dangerous. She connected dots. She showed the clip of Lucas walking away, calm as the world crashed behind him. She played Pastor Raymond's quote about blood-drenched clothes. She played Erin's serene insistence that there's nothing to hide. Then she read, line by line, the email from the former employee. We were told by senior leadership to stop asking for full internal footage, to let the investigators handle it. But when we tried to see what our own cameras captured, we were blocked. That goes to Erin first. They said. She paused. Let the word sit. If this was just a straightforward tragedy, why centralize all information through the widow who has now become the CEO? The episode didn't stop there. Candace showed snippets of internal memos, redacted, anonymized, but with enough context to trigger imaginations. Messages about reputation management, donor reassurance, and avoiding narrative drift. None of it proved a crime, but All of it suggested control over the story, control over the evidence, control over who got to ask questions. The reaction was immediate. Within 24 hours, protest organizers had formed online groups with names like #JusticeForCharlie and #ReleaseTheFootage. They weren't protesting the state. They weren't marching on the courthouse. They weren't marching on the courthouse. They were marching on Liberty Forward Network's headquarters. It started as a few dozen people with homemade signs and printed thumbnails of Candace's episode. "We want answers. Show us the tapes. Why is Erin silent about the timeline?" Then came the busloads. Young activists who had once worshipped Charlie, older donors who felt betrayed by the polished statements, and fast pivot back to business as usual. Parents who used to bring their teenagers to Liberty Forward events and now wondered if they had been walking their kids into something darker. News crews lined the sidewalks. Some networks framed it as a tragic misunderstanding fueled by grief and internet speculation. Others went in harder, asking whether Liberty Forward was prioritizing optics over truth inside the glass walls of headquarters. Erin watched from a top-floor conference room. Communications directors circled around her, phones buzzing. Careful words bouncing off the walls. "We can weather this. It's an emotional wave. It will pass. Do not respond directly to Candace." But Candace had already taken things further. 2 days after the first episode, she released another. This time, she brought in insiders, their faces blurred, voices distorted, documents flashing on screen. One claimed that shortly after Charlie's death, a secure internal drive had been scrubbed. Another alleged that the organization had rejected an independent forensic analyst's offer to review stage and backstage footage. A third said they were pressured to sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a bereavement bonus. Again, the line between fact and speculation blurred. Again, Candace framed each story as alleged, according to sources. If true, this would mean. But the effect on the public was undeniable. The real turning point came when an attorney, not representing Candace, not tied officially to Liberty Forward, appeared on a rival network and said if what these insiders are saying is accurate, there could be grounds for obstruction. Not necessarily in the criminal investigation yet, but certainly in the court of public transparency. That sentence did more damage than any viral clip, because suddenly, this wasn't just about grief. It was about power on social media. The hashtags evolved. #JusticeForCharlie became #What is Erin hiding? Comment sections filled with slowed-down clips of her interviews. People analyzing her body language, her micro-expressions, the way her fingers tightened on the armrest when asked about the shooter. Look at her eyes when they mention the phone calls. She smiles when they bring up the case being solid. Who does that? She's acting like a brand ambassador, not a widow. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Liberty Forward's board was fracturing. One faction argued for full transparency, release every frame of footage, publish a timeline of every call, every text, every decision made in the first 48 hours after the shooting. The other faction, the one Erin seemed aligned with, warned that doing so would fuel hysteria, compromise security protocols, and hand ammunition to bad faith actors. Then, the leak, a draft legal letter, apparently from Liberty Forward's attorneys, surfaced online. It was addressed not to the press, not to the protest organizers, but to Candace. The letter accused her of defamation, demanded retractions of certain phrases, and hinted at seeking a gag order if she continued to spread unsubstantiated claims that could harm the organization and its leadership overnight. Candace's supporters turned the letter into a rallying cry. Why are they trying to silence her if there's nothing to hide? First they control the footage. Now they want to control the narrative. This is bigger than Liberty Forward. This is about who owns the truth. For the first time, Erin was forced to decide, stay silent and let the lawyers speak, or step in front of a camera and face the storm herself. Her advisors urged caution. The optics of a widow being harassed by an online commentator will work in your favor, one said. You gain nothing by acknowledging her, but the protests outside were growing. The staff in the building were whispering, and a petition circulating online had crossed 1 million signatures demanding that Erin, as chair and CEO, call for a public release of all evidence related to Charlie's death. In a late-night strategy session, one board member finally said what others were thinking: this won't go away until Erin talks. They've made her the symbol. She has to reclaim that. 2 days later, the announcement came: Erin Cross would sit down for a tell-all interview, not with a friendly network, not with a carefully controlled house host. But with an anchor known for hard questions and brutal follow-ups. The countdown began. Candace's audience waited. Liberty Forward's enemies waited. The protesters outside headquarters waited, huddled around smartphones replaying old clips. Everyone wanted to know, would Erin finally demand the same transparency Candace had been screaming about? Or would she dig in and prove in real time exactly what her critics feared? The interview was scheduled for a Thursday night. By Wednesday morning, it was already a global event. Anchor Reels teased it as the Widow Speaks. Columnists called it the most consequential interview of the decade for the populist movement. Foreign outlets from Europe to South America framed it as a test of whether American activist empires can police themselves in capitals around the world. Strategists watched with interest. Because Liberty Forward Network wasn't just an organization. It was a signal, a symbol of how quickly a media brand could become a political force. How a single charismatic figure like Charlie could shift discourse, mobilize millions, and terrify traditional power structures. His death had already triggered uneasy conversations in think tanks and private dinners. If someone can take out a figure like Charlie in the middle of a live EV and under heavy security, what does that say about the stability of this new era? Now, there was a second, more unsettling question: if an organization like Liberty Forward can close ranks around that event, control the narrative, and potentially suppress uncomfortable details, what does that say about the future of transparency? In one European newspaper, an editorial drew a chilling comparison. In past eras, governments controlled information with state media. In this era, movements control information with brands. The difference is only cosmetic. As the clock ticked toward the interview, markets didn't crash. No sirens blared. But there were signs. Donor advisory firms quietly flagged Liberty Forward-related entities as high reputational risk. Advertisers began pulling their spots from shows closely tied to the organization. Streaming platforms saw a surge in interest for documentaries about past political scandals, as if audiences were subconsciously bracing for something historic. The night of the interview, the cities glowed with screens. In bars, on living room walls, in student dorms, even in the lobbies of hotel chains. The image was the same: a sleek studio, an anchor sitting across from a composed, carefully styled widow, Erin Cross. She didn't look broken. She didn't look angry. She looked prepared. The anchor started gently. Questions about the night of the shooting, about Charlie's last words, about grief, loss, and faith. Erin answered flawlessly. She spoke about pain, about resilience, about honoring the mission. Then 3 words shifted the air in the room. Let's talk evidence. The anchor leaned in. Candace Ward says you are helping to cover up the truth about your husband's death. She says you've centralized control of footage, documents, and internal accounts. She says that instead of demanding transparency, you're managing optics. What is your response? The world held its breath. Erin's eyes flickered, just for a second, then she smiled. My response, she said, is that grief looks different on everyone. While Candace has chosen to turn her pain into a spectacle, I have chosen to protect the integrity of the investigation and the people who work for Liberty Forward. It was a sharp, calculated strike. People at home shifted uneasily. The anchor didn't move. So you deny blocking access to internal footage? I deny any suggestion that we have obstructed justice in any way, Erin replied. We have complied fully with the investigation. We have handed over every piece of evidence requested. What we will not do is release sensitive security data to satisfy online hysteria. The word hung between them. Hysteria. The word hung between them. Hysteria. Outside the network building, small crowds watching on giant outdoor screens erupted, some in cheers, some in outrage. Inside living rooms, group chats lit up. She just called all of us hysterical. She's protecting staff or protecting secrets? She still hasn't answered why she needed control of everything. The anchor pressed on. Aaron, there are reports, alleged. Yes, that staff were told that everything goes through you first in the days after Charlie's death. Did you personally review footage before it was shared with investigators? Aaron paused longer this time. I was involved, she admitted, in making sure that what we handed over was organized, documented, and secure. That's called responsibility, not cover-up. The anchor pounced. Were there any clips, any images, any internal messages that you chose not to hand over because they might be misinterpreted? A shadow passed over Aaron's face. We handed over everything legally required, she said carefully. Beyond that, I will not allow my husband's legacy to be torn apart by conspiracy theorists who would analyze every pixel of footage like it's an entertainment product in a control room somewhere else in the city. Candace watched the feed live. She rewound that sentence 3 times. We handed over everything legally required. To some, it sounded reasonable. To others, it sounded like an admission. Because in a case that had become a battle between truth versus narrative, legally required felt like a low bar. As the interview continued, the anchor pulled up a tablet. We've also obtained a draft of a letter from Liberty Forward's attorneys to Ms. Ward, suggesting a potential gag order. Can you explain why your organization is considering legal action against someone you say is simply in pain? For the first time, Aaron's composure slipped because there is a difference, she said, voice tightening, between grief and an attempt to burn down everything my husband built. She is not asking questions. She is inciting a mob, and I will not stand by while she tries to destroy us. There it was. Us. Not justice. Not truth. Us. The world drew lines in real time. To Aaron's defenders, she emerged as a strong leader under siege by a reckless commentator. To her critics, she confirmed their worst fears, that her priority was the organization, not the unanswered questions around Charlie's death on social media. Clips from the interview were spliced, remixed, slowed down, captioned. One, in particular, went viral. Aaron saying, "We handed over everything legally required," followed by a montage of protesters chanting, "Release the tapes," within hours. Foreign broadcasters were running segments comparing this moment to historic scandals. A Latin American outlet called it a digital age Watergate, only this time. The tapes belonged to a movement, not a president, a European commentator mused. Nothing like this has happened in modern times, where a widow is not simply a symbol of sympathy, but the epicenter of a global trust crisis. Governments watched, movements watched, brands watched, because if a single interview could ignite this level of division, what would happen next? When someone decided to answer Aaron on air, not with speculation, not with rumor, but with something that would be labeled, rightly or wrongly, as proof. It happened 3 nights later. No warning, no network rollout, just a sudden electric notification on millions of phones. Candace Ward, live, the files they didn't want you to see for a moment. It felt like the whole world clicked the same link at the same time. The stream opened to darkness. Then, slowly, a dim studio came into view. Candace sitting at her desk, a folder in front of her, expression calm, but eyes burning. You've heard Aaron's side. She began. You've heard her talk about grief, about responsibility, about fulfilling legal requirements. She tapped the folder. Tonight, you're going to see why that isn't enough, and why I believe she is actively helping to cover up the truth about Charlie's death. The chat exploded. Some begged her to be careful. Others urged her to drop everything. A smaller, anxious group pleaded for restraint. Don't start a war you can't stop. Candace opened the folder one by one. She pulled out documents. Some were already familiar: internal memos referencing reputation management, emails about containing narrative drift. She had shown hints of these before, but tonight, There were new pieces, a timestamped log of security footage requests with certain files marked pending, root through EC, an internal message from a junior staffer asking if they were allowed to share raw clips with federal investigators, followed by a senior official's response, "Stand down. EC will decide what leaves the building," and then the file that would send shockwaves through every corner of the digital world, a short, shaky video. Not from the main cameras, not from the professional feeds. From a phone, Candace hit play. The screen showed a backstage hallway, narrow, dim, the muffled thud of the crowd beyond the wall. The timestamp placed it within minutes after the shot. In the footage, a figure you could clearly identify as Lucas McCoy walked briskly down the hall, phone in hand. Behind him, out of focus, two staffers argued in urgent whispers, "We need to send everything now. All angles! This is a crime scene. We can't release anything until she sees it." Who? Security? No, Aaron, the video cut off there. Candace let the silence grow. "They told you," she said softly, "that they complied fully, that nothing was being hidden, that any delays were just about organization and security protocols." She replayed the clip, zooming in on the staffers. "This isn't an official memo. This isn't a statement crafted by lawyers. This is chaos, panic, and in their panic, they reveal who is really making the decisions on its own." The clip didn't prove evidence was destroyed. It didn't prove footage was altered. But it strongly suggested one thing in the crucial minutes after Charlie's death. Staff were not asking what justice demanded, they were asking what Aaron would allow. Candace moved on. She brought up a screenshot of a spreadsheet, redacted names, but visible column headers, footage angle, primary custodian, investigator access, status, beside several entries. The status read, "Held, EC review." They will say, she narrated, that review just meant organizing. They will say it was about redacting the faces of staff or removing sensitive security details. But ask yourself, she leaned into the camera, if this was your husband, would you want to slow anything down? The comment feed filled with variations of the same sentence. "I wouldn't." Then came the final blow. Candace pulled out a printed email. She said nothing at first, letting the audience sit with the image of it. "This," she finally said, "is from a member of Aaron's personal advisory circle. Someone who wrote to me after she saw Aaron's interview. She risked everything by sending this." She began to read. The email described a private meeting in Aaron's home days after the shooting. Board members, legal advisors, senior staff. The discussion, according to the writer, wasn't about how do we get every scrap of evidence to investigators as fast as possible. It was about optics. How to reassure donors, how to keep partners from backing away, how to frame the shooter as the single, tidy villain without inviting questions about internal security, backstage access, or any possibility of inside cooperation. And at the bottom of the email was a line allegedly spoken by Aaron herself. "We cannot let this investigation tear the organization apart. We give them what we must. Nothing more." Candace looked up. "Do you hear it now? The priorities? Because I do. And it breaks my heart. In palaces, in parliaments, in corporate boardrooms, people watched. They weren't just seeing a widow and a commentator fight. They were watching a movement crack on camera. Trust, that elusive currency that underpins nations, markets, and revolutions, was hemorrhaging in real time. If a widow could be seen as choosing brand over brutal truth, if an activist empire could be caught gatekeeping evidence in its moment of greatest tragedy, what did that say about the future of every cause that asks for loyalty? In the streets outside Liberty Forward headquarters, protests had evolved into something else. Not just chants, not just signs. People were now projecting messages onto the side of the building. Truth over brand. Release the tapes. Who is she protecting? Some held candles for Charlie. Some held phones, replaying Candace's stream. Police lines held the crowd back. But the real riot was online, a storm of demands, boycotts, resignations, and open letters inside. Aaron faced a choice no public figure wants: step down and be seen as admitting guilt, cling to power, and risked burning down everything. Constitutional scholars went on air speculating about what would happen if an organization like Liberty Forward imploded. Would its supporters scatter and vanish, or would they harden, radicalize, fueled by a sense of betrayal? Digital analysts warned, we're witnessing a new kind of collapse. Not of a government, not of a bank, but of belief, collapse, betrayal, exposure, change, the four horsemen of the new age. As Candace's stream neared its end, she asked a question that cut through all the documents, all the files, all the whispers. If they can do this to the man they built everything on, what do you think they would do to you? The screen faded to black. And somewhere, in a quiet, guarded room, Erin stared at her own reflection, knowing that the next move she made would not just decide her career. It would decide whether anyone, anywhere, ever believed her again. Anywhere, ever believed her again. So here we are, on one side, a widow turned CEO, insisting she's holding the line, protecting staff, and honoring her husband's legacy. On the other, a former ally turned relentless accuser, insisting she has the receipts that show not just mismanagement, not just poor optics, but a deliberate effort to control, filter, and possibly bury the truth about what happened the night Charlie Keaton died. This isn't just a story about one movement, one organization, or one fallen leader. It's about who owns the narrative when everything is on the line. It's about whether complying with legal requirements is enough in an age where people demand raw transparency. It's about the terrifying possibility that the causes we trust most might prioritize survival over truth, people versus elite, truth versus lies, old order versus new, and right now, those lines are sharper than ever. I want to hear from you. Do you think Erin is desperately trying to hold a broken organization together? Or has she crossed the line from grieving widow to active gatekeeper of the truth? Do you believe Candace is a reckless arsonist setting everything on fire? Or the only one brave enough to walk into the smoke? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't hold back. The more perspectives we get, the harder it becomes for anyone, any brand, any organization, any movement to control the narrative from the top down. If you're tired of being fed polished statements and choreographed grief, if you want the raw, unfiltered breakdowns you will never see on mainstream networks, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Because this story, it's not stopping here, and neither are we. Share this video with anyone who still believes it could never happen inside their movement. Show it to the people who think loyalty means never asking questions, because in this new world, silence isn't respect. It's permission. And remember, the story isn't ending. It's only beginning.